Welcome to the UCLA Teaching Kitchen and welcome to our workshop on meal prep for Stress Less Week. We wanted to put together a menu so that you wouldn't have to stress about what to eat, when to make it, how to make it. We wanted to provide you with as many resources for this as possible. So you should have gotten recipes, a timeline breakdown on how to do all the prep if you want to do all the prep at once. And you're going to get this video to give you some visuals on some of the more helpful techniques and tricks to make this menu. If you just like some of the recipes, then we encourage you to just mix and match and try some of these recipes out. But the idea is for you not to have to worry too much about it so that we can be less stressed, right? So I'm just going to be demonstrating a couple of the recipes, basically some of the techniques involved in some of the recipes so that you guys are not just thrown to the wolves and you have a little bit of a head start in how to approach this. But if anybody does have any extra questions about order in which to do things or the best methods or best tools, we are here for you at the UCLA Teaching Kitchen. You can reach us via our website, email, or reach us on Instagram at UCLA Teaching Kitchen. I'm going to be demonstrating the soup, the butternut squash and pear soup. I'm going to be demonstrating how to put together the roasted vegetable tomato sauce for your pasta. I'm also going to be demonstrating the roasted broccolini and the breakfast egg and veggie cups, as well as some hard-boiled eggs. So I'm going to be putting a lot of food together in the next 30 or so minutes, and hopefully this gives you guys a little bit of a, I don't know, just sort of a glimpse, a feeling of organization so that you know what you're doing moving into this meal prep so that you literally don't have to stress. All right, so we want to get our butternut squash into the oven. I want to point this out. When I'm doing meal prep and I'm prepping out a bunch of different recipes and a bunch of different like little meal items, I pack them all out separately. So I use little cookie trays. You can use plates. You can use anything that you have that might work for that type of situation so that you can organize things in a way that like this goes with this. And you're not just scrounging around for all of your ingredients. You have everything ready to go. And plus, it just makes you feel really good. You can kind of look at everything and feel like you know what you're doing. And it's a lot easier to clean up if you start off by being really organized with what you're doing. So for this recipe, the butternut squash and pear soup, I've got my butternut squash. I've got some extra virgin olive oil. I have got my Bartlett pears. I've got 2 cloves of garlic. Let's see where the other guy goes. Yep, I've got my garlic. I've got my vegetable stock. I've got ground ginger and ground cinnamon. And then we always want some salt and pepper nearby when we're doing our cooking. So I've got all of my different butternut squash necessities here ready to go. I'm just going to quickly put these together so that we can get this into the oven and move on with the rest of our recipes, just so you can get some basic guidelines on how to get through this menu, this meal prep menu. So butternut squash. The best way to approach this is to cut off both ends and then peel it completely. Then we're going to cut it in half and scoop it out. So I need to really quickly, you're just going to run your knife from the tip through to the base while pushing down. Start at the tip, run it through to the base while pushing down, and then you can remove both ends. That is great for veggie stock if you want to make a soup. And then we want to cut the thing in half, but this is a little unwieldy and crazy, so you cut it in half widthwise first. Again, you start with the tip, slide it in until you get to the base and push down. So we've got our 2 halves of butternut squash. This half is the one with the seeds in it. Might not even need that much here today. I'm just going to demonstrate. So I'm going to start with this. We're going to use just a classic vegetable peeler. And you want to just peel away from you. It's a pretty tough skin, but you don't necessarily need to peel any more than just one strip. If you peel more, you'll get a much brighter orange color, but you don't need to remove that much of the inner flesh. You want to make sure that you're leaving as much of your vitamins and fiber and goodness behind, but we do want to remove the peel because it's not going to blend nicely in our soup. So you just make sure you've gotten all of the peel off all of the edges, bottom and top. All right, so then you've got your solid butternut squash. If you're doing the end that has the seeds in it, you would do the same thing. Peel it whole and then cut it in half and scrape out any of the seeds. Now, butternut squash seeds are great for a snack. You can absolutely clean them, roast them, toss them with your favorite seasoning, and you've got a really yummy, healthy snack good to go. Plus, you already paid for it, right? You bought that butternut squash, seeds and all. So we want to cut this butternut squash into cubes. You're looking for this full batch of recipe. The recipe says about 6 cups worth of cubes. We're probably going to get about 2 cups here out of this much of a butternut. So depending on the size of the butternut squash, you might need a little bit more or a little bit less, but anywhere around 6 cups of squash cubes. So I just cut this into long planks, and then the planks get cut into long strips, and it's a hard vegetable. So you need to protect your fingers, go through at the tip and then down in sort of a guillotine chop. Tip down first and then chop down. That will just really help ensure that you're keeping your fingers safe, but also you're not struggling too hard to try to get that knife through the butternut squash. Oh yeah, that's probably about 2 cups. I might get closer to 3 to 4 cups out of this. So again, you leave this standing upright and then you slice down through it lengthwise. And then you can cut those into long sticks, or bâtons as we call them, which is just stick, I think, in French. And then you can cut across those sticks into your cubes. That's how we get a nice dice. The smaller the cubes that you cut them, the faster they roast. So if you want this soup to be done in even less time, then you cut your butternut squash very small and it will roast very fast. And then you can have your roasted squash soup in even less time. But if you cut them about 1/2 inch, it'll take about 20 minutes to roast. So anywhere in that normal time frame is actually pretty good for meal prep, because then you can get other things done while those are working in the oven. So I've got a little sheet pan with foil on it. That's really helpful just in terms of cleaning, especially when you're roasting things at really high heat. So I've got my oven turned on to 400. Let's double check the recipe. Yep, 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Lined our sheet with foil, and I am going to toss this with my extra virgin olive oil and a teeny tiny bit of salt. Just a little bit. You barely need any, but it's going to help kind of enhance the flavors as they cook. You're going to toss this with the oil, making sure that the cubes are well coated all the way around on all sides, and then try to spread them out in a single layer. The less stacked your veggies are, the more the faster they'll cook and the more roasty they'll be, the more caramelized the flavor will get. And that is great because that means even less sugar and less salt will need to be added to our food to make it delicious. So we've got our squash cubes. We're going to bake these, depending on how big you cut them, for 20 to 30 minutes or so. But a good 400-degree oven will usually roast a nice small chopped veg like that in about 20 minutes. You're just going to check them halfway through and then spin them around as is needed through the process, because nothing cooks evenly in an oven. So you always want to try to give your tray a 180 spin halfway through the roasting process. The next thing we want to get into that oven, also for the soup, are our pears. It's quite literally butternut squash and pear soup. And so those are our main ingredients here. We're going to leave the skin on the pear. You don't have to necessarily peel these. They're going to just roast and break down. There's a lot of sugar in the skins, and so they will blend nicely into the soup. You do want them to be fairly ripe. And you, so if they're super duper hard, then maybe look for one at the store that's just a little bit more tender, a little bit softer. And if you got pears that are a little bit too hard, then put them in a paper bag overnight with a tiny piece of a banana peel or an orange peel. Those kinds of things release small amounts of natural gases, and they'll help to ripen up your fruit inside the bag. Works with avocados really well. Random side note. Okay, so all I did there was cut around the stem of the pear. I just cut around and then next side around so that you're cutting basically the pear off the core, and all you're left with is the main thin core of the pear with the seeds in it. You can set that to the side, and you're going to cut your pear into about half-inch thick slices, so fairly thick, anywhere in that range. Okay, kind of like what you would eat as a snack. Cut all of these pears into that nice thick slice, and we're going to put this on a second sheet pan. We're going to toss these pears up with some of that same olive oil and some garlic. We want to have our garlic roasted. It's just going to give it some nice, really slightly more mild garlic flavor, like really good garlic flavor, but not spicy garlic like raw garlic can be. So we're going to roast it up with our pears in the oven as the squash is working. So as we do our meal prep here, I want you to, I hope you noticed, anything that goes into the oven, focus on that first. Anything that's going to take a long period of time to roast or bake, get that going, because then you can, while things are in the oven, do some of your other prep. Like I'm going to be making some of the hard-boiled eggs. You could be making the balsamic vinaigrette. There's other things on this meal prep menu that don't require long periods of cooking or the oven. So while those things are working in the oven, you get all your other stuff done, which is why you want to get that going first. So look at what takes the longest. Look at what needs to be in the oven for the most amount of time. Those are the kinds of things we tried to lay out in the timeline that we gave everybody so that you can do this in as efficient amount of time as possible. So we want to add in, it says 2 cloves of garlic, give or take. I'm using a very large clove of garlic, so I'm going to just use that one. And I'm just going to remove the stem end because eventually I'm not going to want that into my soup. And then I'm going to smash this just using the flat side of my knife. I'm going to lay it on the garlic and then press, and that smashes the clove, and then the paper just comes right off like a jacket. It's the easiest and fastest way to peel your garlic, and then we want it smashed anyway, so I'm going to just sort of naturally break that apart where it wants to after being smashed up, and I'm going to toss that smashed garlic with the pears. Okay, so we've got a little bit of olive oil, the garlic, teeny tiny pinch of salt, and a teeny tiny pinch of pepper if you like. Pepper doesn't hurt. And then toss that up. Again, making sure that the pears themselves are very well coated. Nothing is dry. We want it to have a nice, good roast, get really good flavor. Okay, single layer, flat as possible, so we get good caramelization. And then this goes into the oven along with the butternut squash. You're going to roast all of these up for about that 20 minutes. Okay, so while those are working, we are actually going to get a few more things into the oven as part of some of our bigger projects. Okay, so moving into our roasted vegetable pasta. This is a really great meal prep option because you can cook the pasta in advance and then keep it separate in like a refrigerator safe bag, a Ziploc or something, and then make the sauce and keep it separate. And so then one night you want some pasta, just maybe one serving of it. You scoop out your noodles and your sauce and you heat it up in a small pot on the stove top and you've got dinner ready to go. It takes about 5 minutes. If you were to make the pasta and the sauce and mix it all together now, then over the week your pasta is going to become more gluey. It's going to absorb too much liquid. And so you want to try to keep these kinds of things separate, but it makes your cooking experience, once it's time to put your meal together, that much faster and easier. And it just like that, you've got a delicious pasta. So what we're going to do is prepare our sauce and get that all done. And it is a pretty simple, straightforward, delicious roasted vegetable tomato sauce. So I want to get my roasted veg into the oven. I have got some large diced zucchini. large diced eggplant, large diced red bell pepper. I've got some smashed garlic. And I had some sliced tomato left over from a different recipe, so I'm just going to use that. And that I want you guys to be encouraged to add in extra veggies, add in your favorite flavors. Definitely make these recipes your own so that they make you happy. We're not trying to convince you to eat food that you don't like. So if you don't like bell pepper, don't put it in. If you really like broccoli or you want to add in some asparagus, high five. That would be a really wonderful plan. Just chop it up and roast it with the rest, and you're going to have a lovely roasted vegetable sauce. Even healthier with extra veggies, right? So don't be afraid to kind of tweak things, make them your own. If it's going to stress you out, especially you don't like eggplant, then don't eat the eggplant. Stress free, right? So we want to large dice our onion. I want to demonstrate how I do that. I leave the root end attached always. It just helps keep it all together as we're cutting. And then I cut in horizontally into the flat side, but not all the way through. I'm going to stop short before I cut through that root end. It's always attached. And then I'm going to go around, cutting into the grooves that naturally exist in the onion. There's little lines in there, and they want to be cut, but not all the way through that root. All still attached, you see? Sort of like a bloomin' onion thing. Anyway, then we chop across those cuts. So just straight across those line cuts that you just made, straight down into your large dice onion, okay? So we've got our large dice onion. I'm going to set that aside. Do the second half. Cut in horizontally, down through the grooves, and then across those cuts. That's how you get a dice onion every time, whether you want small dice or large dice. This works, okay? So we are going to toss all of our yummy veggies, just like we did with our butternut squash and our pears. We're going to get everything prepared onto another foil lined baking sheet. If you have parchment paper, that works just as well, okay? So we've got our onions. We've got our bell pepper. You can use any color. Actually, the red happened to be on sale, but whatever works. I've got my eggplant, my zucchini, and just because I had it, my sliced tomato and my garlic. Okay, set this aside. I'm going to gently drizzle just a little bit of olive oil over all of this. We really want to make sure that things are coated, especially the eggplant. Eggplant can get pretty dry, but we don't want any of these veggies swimming in oil. We don't want to have a pool of oil down at the bottom of this sheet pan after we toss it all together. Everything should be pretty well coated, and then that's it. And we are going to add to this some dried herbs. We want to add dried oregano and dried basil. If you have fresh oregano and fresh basil, fantastic. You would just use a little bit less. A little bit more. My apologies. Dried herbs are really potent, and so you don't need as much of them as you do fresh herbs. So if you're using fresh, you would want to use about 3 teaspoons of oregano at least. We're using 2 here for our dried. Dried basil, it's about 1 teaspoon for dried, so I would say about 2 teaspoons for fresh. You just want to kind of bump it up a little bit when you're working with fresh herbs because they are not quite as condensed and potent in flavor as the dried ones are, right? Teeny tiny pinch of salt, like literally just a few grains, and then some pepper if you like that. And then toss that all up, make sure everything gets nice coated with the oil. We want to get this into the oven roasting. The recipe says 425 for these vegetables, but we're going to go in at the same time with the butternut squash, and they're going to turn out just fine. Once the butternut squash comes out, if these still want to get a little bit more caramelized, we can always turn the heat up. But 400 for a roasted vegetable for your pasta sauce is also going to be Okay, so I don't want you to think you have to do everything in a separate oven. That is going to go in now in the same 400-degree oven. I'm going to put that one pretty close to the top though. So it's going to be on the top rack where it's going to actually get a little bit of extra heat from the top of the oven. So that's how we can kind of adjust the temperature a little bit. But what it just means is that they're going to maybe have to roast just a little bit longer than they would have if we were at 425, but they're going to still be really, really great. So I am going to now get ready with my last roasting item. Just because if we're roasting, we might as well roast it all. We have got our broccolini. The cheese and the lemon is to finish the broccoli once it comes out of the oven, but we're going to roast this whole with some yummy smashed large garlic. So let's double check. We've got about a pound of young Italian broccoli, which is this broccolini. It looks like broccoli on top because it is, and it's long and fresh and delicious. It's a little less bitter than broccoli. I find it roasts beautifully, and we're just going to leave it whole like this. If you do have any stalks that are much thicker than the rest, then just split those in half with your knife, and you're going to be good to go. So I've got my last tray with foil here. I'm going to add my broccolini and my whole smashed big pieces of garlic. Can you see that? Yeah. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drizzle the olive oil, teeny tiny pinch of salt and pepper, and pop this into the oven. The broccolini wants 425 as well, but they're going to be fine at 400. The butternut squash, you could technically roast it at 425, and we could do all of these at about 425. You could split the difference around 415. It wouldn't hurt any of these things. You just really need to be aware and attentive to the food itself. So pay attention to your nose when you start to smell things cooking. Then you might want to give them a little check, and pay attention to your timer. So set that timer for halfway through the cooking process, and you're going to be able to stay on top of anything, even if it's going faster than you expected, right? So coated with a little bit of olive oil, tossed up with that nice chunky peeled garlic, tiny sprinkle of salt, plenty of pepper if you like it, and into the oven to roast. Okay, so we have got our roasty things roasting. There's a few other things in this meal plan that you could be tweaking. I'm not going exactly according to the timeline that we gave you because I'm not demonstrating every single recipe here, but generally think about your longest cooking items, thinking about what you could have going in the meantime. If I were making the pasta today, you could have a pot coming up to boil right now while you prep some of your other ingredients. So you're just trying to think about how you can do more than one thing at a time, but noticing that I'm also trying to stay kind of organized and clean as I go. I am going to start what I've got here. I think you can see in my overhead camera. A small pot with some eggs. I'm going to be making hard-boiled eggs as one of the snacks. And I just wanted to demonstrate this because I find that it's a helpful technique to learn. I'm going to add just a little more water. All you don't want your eggs to be in a very huge pot so that once they start boiling, they're smashing around like a bull in a china shop. You want a pot that's just big enough to hold your eggs and just enough water to cover them. And then you're going to put that in the pot, get that going, cold water, and then turn it on high heat. And once you've got it on high heat, it's going to come up to a boil. Boil is 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. So start with cold water. Fill up your pot just to cover the eggs. Get it going on a very high heat. Once you are at a boil, you're going to reduce the heat to a simmer so that it is constantly bubbling but not violently crashing around. And then once you've reached that temperature, 11 minutes of cooking is the give or take value, but you don't want it to be violently boiling. Just make sure that they're simmering. So I don't know if you can see, this is on a really high heat and it's already coming up to that like slow simmer with the little teeny tiny bubbles starting to release all of their pressure. So once it's at a rolling boil, that's when I'm going to reduce the heat and let it do its thing for about 11 minutes. So I want to make sure that I have a timer nearby. There we go. And while the eggs are working and our broccolini is working and our veggies for our pasta sauce are working and our veggies for our soup are all working, the last thing that I wanted to demonstrate some tricks on how to make is our breakfast egg cups, our egg and veggie toast cups. So this is a really great meal prep option because you can get a lot of them done in advance. Even if you don't eat them all this week, they freeze decently, and so you can make some for next week. But this is a really great kind of easy, fun thing if you've got kids in the house, especially. This is great for them to help you with. So I'm at a rolling boil. You can see that hopefully in my overhead camera. I'm going to reduce the temperature so that I can maintain boil. You know, like a low boil, a high simmer, but that it's not violent the whole time. Okay, we want bubbles, we want boil, but we don't want it to be violent the whole time. All right, so anywhere kind of around 210 to 215 degrees is your boiling point. Okay, so that's just going to kind of keep heating and reheating because I've got an electric burner here. And so it turns itself on and off and on and off as needed. It's spilling over. Okay, it's going to be perfect. Yeah. While that thing is working, while other things are working, you can get other stuff done for yourself. Let me slide this away. The steam, I'm getting a little bit of an egg facial. Okay, so our egg cups. This is one of the other things that I really wanted to demonstrate just because there's a little bit of a method, a little bit of a technique to getting the bread just right and getting all of your muffin cups filled. So I'm going to my muffin pan here and demonstrate how to roll out the bread. So what you want to have nearby is some melted butter. Although if you would prefer to use olive oil or canola oil, that is totally fine in this situation. And I'm going to get all of my muffin cup ingredients here. Keeping an eye on the time so that my eggs don't get overcooked. Okay, so I've got a few minutes left on those. This is the key with the bread for the toast cups. You want to roll it out like with a pastry roller. You want to have your bread. You're going to roll it out with the crust on. Let's do one slice first and then I'll demonstrate. With the crust on, you roll it out first. If you don't have a rolling pin, you can use a wine bottle or any other kind of like long cylindrical heavy object that you can press down firmly and roll out thin. So I'm trying to start in the center and press down, pressing forward, and then start in the center, press down, rolling back. And so you're kind of rolling over the crust, making the inner part of the bread as thin as you can, pressing out repeatedly, flip the bread over, 180-degree turn, and then keep rolling. So we really want that bread to be nice and thin and flat and pressed out as much as possible. And then you're going to cut the crust off. So we do that with the crust on so that if we need to, we can roll over it. You're just trying to remove the very, very edge of the outer crust. Okay, and then you're going to cut this into triangles. Even if it's not a square piece of bread, that's okay. You're going to cut it into triangles and making sure that it's nice and flat. They're going to get brushed with that melted butter or oil if you prefer on both sides. Just a little bit goes a long way. You don't need a lot, but this helps make toast out of it. We're going to kind of toast our little crusts and then we're going to fill our egg cups. So this is how you want to do it. You want to brush them both sides. And then With the cut side facing each other, you are going to line the inside of your muffin cup by pressing this to the inside, and then the same thing with this one, pressing it down on the inside, bringing the point around. Do you guys see how I did that? And leave the edges sticking up. That's totally fine. Just like that. So I'm going to do it again just so you can kind of get a visual of how that worked. Checking our timer. Another 2 minutes for eggs, about. Start in the center of the bread, roll in one direction forward, and then back, pressing down firmly. Turn it around 180 degrees and flip over. Then press out, rolling forward, then pressing down, rolling back. You're trying to get the edges and the center as thin and flat as possible. Once we've got that, once we feel like it's nice and thinned out, you're going to remove the crusts. And then cut it in half in triangle. Brush the triangles on both sides with melted butter or oil. And then you're going to fit the triangles into the muffin cups as such. Let me show you here. If you can see in the overhead camera, what I'm doing is I'm placing the long side in the cup so that it covers at least half of the bottom, pressing it into the edges. Okay, so I've kind of lined one side, and then I'm going to use the other half of the bread to press it, meeting it down at the bottom, kind of squishing the two pieces of bread together. And you can leave the edges to poke up, or you can break them off as you want to. Okay, making your little toast cup. Can you see in the overhead there? Yeah, see how it's still got a little cup? It's got the opening. We've kind of pressed the two breads together, making our little cup of toast. All right, and you can repeat that process as many times as you want. The recipe calls for 6, so that would make 6 of these muffins. You can absolutely double that. You can do as many as you feel you have time, or as many as your family will eat. I'm just going to do one more here, and then we're going to fill these and get them baking. Okay, so the toast cup themselves wants to bake for just about 5 minutes, just long enough until it actually starts to crisp up a little bit and it's turning into toast, so that when we put in all of our other ingredients, it doesn't just sog through and soak into the bread. I'm turning off my boiled eggs. I am getting a container with water. I am going to use a pair of tongs to very carefully lift my eggs out of the water into the cool cup of water so that they may begin to cool down faster. Because the faster I can peel them, then the better off they will likely be. Just going to clean this up, set this aside. We want to get one more thing set up here on our burner so that we can heat up our vegetable stock for our soup, because all of that stuff is roasting in the oven, and we want to make sure that when it's done, we're ready for it and we can just keep moving along with our meal prep. So if you've got a stove at home with 4 burners, you could have your veg stock in a small pot in the back, somewhere where it can keep warm but not overcook. You can have your water boiling for the pasta. That bread is good. All right, I'm going to toast these for just a moment, but first I'm going to show you guys what we've got coming out of the oven. Broccolini's done. That is a beautiful thing. So I want you to see what roasted broccolini should look like. Don't be afraid of letting it get char roasted. It should get really nice and colorful. That caramelization effect that's happening on those flours is delicious natural flavor. You can go past this point and burn your broccolini, so be aware of what's going on in your oven. at all times. Set your timers, look at everything. Broccolini doesn't take long. It's got a good water content and a good sugar content, so it shouldn't take very long. And mine is done. I'm just going to show you here those big old chunks of roasted garlic and that beautiful roasted broccolini. So all I would do for this now, you remember I had some Parmesan and some lemons. We're going to zest the lemon and soak it with some Parmesan cheese because yummy. I'm also going to take a look while I'm in here at my pears and my squash because everything is looking pretty perfect to me. Yep, we're there. So I'm going to reduce the heat in my oven. I know I'm off camera right now. I apologize. I'm going to reduce the heat down to 350, 325-ish, and toast my toast. That's only going to take a couple of minutes, so I want to be really conscious of that. I know that there's a draw to like just start everything all at once. I encourage you to have more than one thing going at the same time because then you're going to get your stuff done, but just make sure that you can manage what you're doing. Don't have everything going all at once and then you're like, everything just burned. Hopefully that timeline that we provided you guys is helpful with that. So I'm just going to zest this lemon, part of this lemon directly onto the broccolini while it's still hot and the oil is still warm, and it's going to really absorb the lemon and it's going to kind of continue cooking that flavor into my broccolini. It's going to be lovely. And I'm going to sprinkle a bunch of cheese because like that's just going to also kind of cook in as a flavor as it sits here and cools down. And then when I go to serve it, I'm going to top it with some extra cheese. But this way, it actually kind of cooks in just a little bit while the broccolini is still hot. Delicious. Just outstanding option for this meal. I mean, this menu and just any of your other meal prep menus or just your regular Tuesday night dinner. Highly encourage the lemon and Parmesan broccolini. It is out of this world delicious. Okay, but I've got my pot here. I've got to get some vegetable stock starting to heat up so that I can finish off the soup. That's going to be our last project. But I want to make sure that I have this part warm because we want to add warm vegetable stock to our roasted warm veggies. So we want about 3 cups, I think it is, of the vegetable stock. It's usually one of these full containers. We want to get kind of organized and squared away here. This is warming so that I can blend my vegetables. I'm going to show you those right now. Some really good caramelization, some good roasting happened here, and we've got them very tender. So the knife just goes through like butter with no pressure, no force, and that is a perfectly roasted pear. And we've got our butternut squash here, which some of them in the corner got a little bit of extra color. But when it's blended into the soup, it's just going to taste like sugars. If there are any pieces that are just a little bit that actually are burnt, you want to set those aside and not put them into your food. It will ruin the whole batch. All right? Not a bad loss, couple of squares. It's because I didn't turn the tray around soon enough in the roasting process. So that's just something that happens sometimes. The back corner got a little bit done. But you can see all of that natural sugar, all of that natural color that occurred. That's just flavor. That's how we're going to have a really delicious, comforting vegetable stock without having to add any extra sugars because there's so much natural sugar in the squash and the pears. Okay, so I've got my toast cups out now. That was just about 3 minutes, and the edges are crispy. The toast is starting to toast. It's starting to dry out in the center. So this is a good place for us to then add in the rest of our ingredients so that these can finish baking while we are finishing up. So a little bit of diced bell pepper. Just going to add in a sprinkle into each cup. A little bit of chopped tomato. If you want to change up whatever vegetables this recipe calls for, have at it. I want you to make food that you enjoy eating. But this is a general concept. You want to get your veggies chopped up and prepped and down into that cup. So I'm kind of pressing down in some baby spinach so that it's down in there. And then we're going to add in a little bit of cheese if that's your thing. You can always put a little cheese on top as well, but this is the fun part, kind of the odd part. You're going to crack an egg directly into that cup. So just crack it off to the side so you don't get any eggshell shards in your food, and then allow this egg to break into this toast cup. Try to keep it in. If it looks like it's falling off the side, then just try to maneuver the toast so that it holds the egg. And that's it. So you can always sprinkle with a little bit more salt and pepper on top. Pepper would be great. I'm going to show you this, what I've got here. It's quite literally a raw egg in a cup with veggies and toast. See that? And then we're going to bake that at 350 until the egg is completely set. All right? Yeah. And that is working. And in the meantime, our veggie stock is hot. You can turn that off. And look at these beautiful roasted veggies for our spaghetti sauce, our pasta sauce. Phenomenal, right? All you do now with the pasta sauce is throw this stuff into a pot with the can of crushed tomatoes and the can of tomato sauce. Stir it all together, taste it for seasoning, and you've got the most bountiful, delicious roasted vegetable tomato sauce to put on your whole wheat pasta, or to just eat with crusty bread, because that's also really delicious. Let me set this aside, making a little space. We want to get our veg stock here. Ooh, bring over our blender. This is to finish off our butternut squash pear soup. If you don't have a blender, then I encourage a food processor would work. If you don't have either of those, then you can use like a Ninja, a Bullet, one of those machines would work well, okay? If you don't have any of those, an immersion blender, the kind you can stick right into the pot, that would also be a perfect tool. Really quickly, I'm going to demonstrate how I peel eggs, just because I think it's kind of helpful. Usually eggs have a rounded tip and a slightly more pointed tip. It's kind of hard to see, but there's usually like a fatter rounded edge and then a pointier edge. So where that rounder edge is, that's where you want to start your cracking, and then crack it all the way down one side. So you've started on the round edge and then you crack all the way down just one side. So underneath that rounded edge is usually an air pocket that forms underneath the shell. And so you can get under it a little easier than on some other parts of the egg. And then on the place where you've cracked it, just all the way down in a line, then that's where you just kind of open it up like a zipper and you just peel away. And I just tend to put the eggshell back in the water, and you can kind of rinse this off a little bit in that cup of water to make sure that you've got any of the teeny tiny fragments of peel off. And then you let your hard-boiled eggs cool and keep them in the fridge in an airtight container, or in a cup of cold water in the refrigerator. Keeps them fresher even longer. Let's just do a little test and see how well we did here with our boiling. That's pretty nice. That's a pretty bright yellow little yolk. It's got a little tiny bit in the very, very center that could maybe cook a little longer. And so these that I haven't peeled yet, they're going to cook a little longer. So, but we've got a really, that's a nice hard-boiled egg in my opinion. So 11 to 12 minutes in your boiling, simmering water. Let them cool down enough that you can touch them, and then store them in a cup with cold water so that you can eat them throughout the week. They're a great snack. They're great to put on salads. They're really great to mix into other things. You'd make an egg salad. So to finish this soup, you want to put your roasted squash, oh, sorry, loud noises. Put your roasted squash and your roasted pears into the blender or food processor or Ninja, whatever you're using. And with the garlic, all of that goodness. You want that all in there. This is another reason why I like using foil on my sheet pans or parchment, because then you can lift it up and bring it over to what you need it for and just kind of scrape off the food. Ooh, these pears got a little bit like candied and caramelized. This is gonna be so good. Okay, so all the pears into the blender as well. And this is going to get worked with cinnamon and ginger, right? We want to double check our recipes as always to make sure we're not forgetting anything. Here we are. So we've got our butternut squash, the olive oil that it got worked with, the Bartlett pears, plus the olive oil and the garlic. We want to add in our vegetable stock, 1/4 teaspoon of ground ginger, and a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. And those flavors are going to help really enhance the flavors of the pear and the butternut squash. Ginger is really commonly used in with pear. They complement each other very, very well. So, excuse me, just a 1/4 teaspoon of both cinnamon and ginger. Right into the blender they go. And to that, we're going to add, like I said, about 3 cups of the vegetable stock hot. This you make all of this warm so that you can serve some of it now. If you're not going to be serving any of it now, then you can go ahead and just use cold vegetable stock and then let it all cool down and put it in the fridge or the freezer. But if you want to eat any of this today, then you want to start with hot vegetable stock. Okay, so I'm going to turn this on low speed and then slowly start to turn it up while adding in some liquid. And then you can continue to increase the speed on the machine as you have added some liquid and as it's working. But you never want to start 0 and then go all the way up to 60 because it will ruin the machine. It will ruin the motor in your machine. So you want to be gentle with that and speed it up gradually, slowly but surely. Adding more liquid as is needed to make sure that it's a nice, smooth, creamy consistency. Once you've got it all the way, you can take it up to full speed, or if you have a different kind of blender, at this point you would use the puree button. And that's going to make sure that it becomes as smooth as silk. Just keep blending until you've got the consistency that you want. Turn it down gradually and then turn it off. I'm going to give it a little peek, check it out, make sure that it looks consistent with what I'm looking for. That looks like soup. Definitely need to taste it, because if we can adjust any seasonings, now's the time. Oh, see, that's perfect. You want it thick enough that it coats the spoon and doesn't just completely fall off, but not so thick that you're chewing your soup, right? That is what we call nappe. It coats the back of a spoon, nappe. So give that a little taste. It's really earthy and yummy. If your butternut squash is maybe not as sweet or your pears were not as sweet, you could always add a little honey. But butternut squash and pears are both in season right now, so they should be at the height of their flavor. And this is fantastic. If you need to adjust with salt, adjust with pepper, you can add in more ginger if you want to enhance the gingerness of this soup. But as long as you've got it to be a nice kind of thick, creamy soup consistency, it coats the back of a spoon, it's well blended, there are no chunks left over, and it tastes good to you, then you're ready to go. You want to pour this into airtight containers. Individual containers are best because then you can either freeze them or store them individually and only thaw out what you want to eat that day. Let's see. The last thing that we were going to do is put together our pasta sauce. Okay, so I've got a large pot. I'm going to add to that my crushed tomatoes and tomato sauce. And I think that it's very helpful to point out whenever you can Purchase items that have no salt added or less salt added or low sodium this or whatever it is. So my crushed tomatoes are no salt added, and I know you can usually find tomato products that are like that. That's pretty helpful. We're always going to add a little bit of salt to our own food, but when there's tons of salt already in it, it really makes it difficult for us to know how much sodium we're eating, how healthy we're being when we're trying to be healthy, right? So, one 15-ounce can of crushed tomatoes, one 15-ounce or so can of tomato sauce. Make sure you get all of that out. Just recycle. And to that, you want to add your yummy roasted veg. We're going to add our roasted vegetables while our tomato products start to heat up. Got that done. All our veggies are in there. And look at that, my sheet pan's clean. If you're doing the entire menu, then there's definitely other things that are involved. But you can see we got this much done in about 40 minutes. And so you can get that entire menu done if you have, maybe you and your family work together, or you just take some time and put on your favorite music. Spend an hour or two prepping your food. You're going to be set for the week. Hopefully the timeline guide helps you guys figure out any questions or issues on how to time this stuff, when to make certain things, when to make other things. We tried to make it really helpful and clear for you. Whoa, one more thing. Gonna check our egg cups. So just as a description also of sort of how uneven ovens can be. This one was in the far back corner and the yolk is done. This one was in the front middle and the yolk is underdone, right? So every spot in the oven has a little slightly different heat pocket. So you kind of want to spin things around as needed or check them throughout the cooking process as needed. But this is also something to know. If you don't like your eggs runny, then you just cook them a little bit longer and you've got a perfectly solid cooked egg yolk and it's in that little toast cup and all that cheese and veggies are buried underneath. Delicious. Or if you like your egg yolk runny, then you cook it until just the whites have set up and you've still got your little runny egg yolk and your toast is crispy and your veggies are done. So you want to let that cool. And then you use like a paring knife or a toothpick even, or a butter knife, and you just scrape around the edges and you have got your delicious toast cups. So all of these things, if you can see in the overhead camera, pasta sauce, full of nutrition and flavor, broccoli, ready to go for that kind of snack or side dish so you don't have to worry about it. Soup, perfect for lunch, dinner, snack, just a cup before bed if you want to warm up. Hard-boiled eggs, really great options for snacks, for throw them into the salad, make different kinds of salads. And then these egg cups, these veggie morning breakfast egg cups are a really great option to have because you can make the whole pan's worth and then you got basically 12 days worth of breakfast ready to go, or enough to feed the family, right? Hopefully this helps. Hopefully you've learned a few tricks that might help you with your own meal prep. Check us out on Instagram, check us out on our website, sign up for all of our other classes. We really enjoy cooking with you and hope to see you in the kitchen.